Hello students, I want to have a quick presentation today on a topic that I think is very interesting, sort of dovetails between psychology and criminal justice, and that topic is implicit bias. If we were in a normal classroom situation, we would have a group opinion poll, but how I would like you to handle it in this distance learning scenario is just to think about each of these scenarios that are posed and just reflect on your own answers to these questions. So, question number 1, we're asked to think about the statement, an attractive person will always be hired before a less attractive one, even though they may have equal qualifications. So just think on that for a few seconds. Pause the video if you want to take a little bit longer, and we'll take a look at what actual research shows. So in reality, studies show that indeed an attractive person is likely maybe not to get hired, but to earn 3 to 4% more than those with below average looks, and that can add up to, some real coin, almost approaching $250,000 over a career. So doesn't really seem right, but that's what the data seems to play out. Let's consider another scenario. Referees only base their calls exactly on the rules of the game. Again, think on that. Pause the video if you want to give it more thought, and we'll look at reality. And studies show here that more personal fouls are called against players when the game is officiated by an opposite race referee than when officiated by a same race refereeing crew. And there may be other factors involved as well. Although I don't have specific data, I'm sure if the opposite parties have had any kind of, personal interaction outside of the game playing setting, that could indeed have an effect. So let's look at example 3. Obese people are less likely to be hired than average weight people. Time to give that one a bit of thought, and we'll look at reality. And here, studies are showing that obese folks are more often disqualified from being hired and less often nominated for promotions to supervisory positions. And on top of that, the findings are even more pronounced for females. What we just saw in opinion questions and survey results or reality are examples of something called implicit bias. So what is this thing, implicit bias? Well, it's the attitudes, or some may say stereotypes, that affect each person's understanding, actions, and decisions that they make unconsciously. These implicit bias cause us to have feelings and attitudes about other people, but we can't really, put a fact on it. It's based on different factors. Could be how people look, whether they're young or old, religious background, race. And these are things that develop in an individual over the course of a lifetime with both direct and indirect, subliminal messages that occur through exposure to societal situations, family situations, situations within a work environment. So here are some very key characteristics about implicit bias. And the two main characteristics are it's pervasive and malleable. So what do those things mean? Something that's pervasive means it's everywhere. So everyone possesses them, even if you think you don't. And even people who have committed their life, their career to impartiality, in particular judges, have implicit biases. And as the term implies, these are different from explicit bias. Explicit bias are those that are very tangible. So you can really understand why there is a connection. So, if a child was raised in an orphanage and it was a crowded situation without any real personal love being doted on the child, then that person may grow up to distrust. So their bias could be described as explicit because we have a narrative, a storyline that explains it. Implicit bias, on the other hand, is that where, yes, there's various experiences through a person's life that builds up this emotional bank account, so to speak, that defines the bias. There's really no particular items that call it out. Implicit biases also don't necessarily align with an individual's declared beliefs or even reflect stances that they would endorse. Pervasive also means that the bias tends to favor what's called our own in-group. So the in-group would be either your family, tight work group, club associates. But that said, research has shown that a person can still hold implicit biases against that group. So pervasive means that they're throughout society, that no one is exempt from having implicit bias. But the second factor is they are malleable. And what is malleable? It means, can be reshaped and reformed. So implicit associations that individuals have formed can be gradually unlearned through a variety of what they call debiasing techniques. So you can be exposed to new situations or new ideas and slowly change points of view and feelings, beliefs. So let's talk about how this sociological or psychological term relates to criminology. And let's do this via, again, some imagination. So you're walking in a public park in a city, and you see someone coming by with a pair of bolt cutters trying to cut off a bike chain. What's going to be your initial reaction? What would you think they're doing? And is your reaction going to be different based on what the individual is wearing, how they comport themselves, their race, all or any factors like this? We are going to go through another exercise. So I'm going to ask you to find a slip of paper or a note card and jot down, as we flip through 10 slides, a T for thief or an O for owner for your knee-jerk initial reaction if you were just, shown this photo very quickly and you just had to make what you call an implicit judgment. And I'll give about 5 seconds per slide as we go through. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and the last 10. So you saw photos of 10 different individuals, and were told that that individual walked into a park with a pair of bolt cutters in their hands and was snapping the chain of a bicycle so as to take that bicycle with them. Now, each of these people may have a legitimate story as to why they are doing this. Perhaps they lost the key to their lock and this is the only way that they were able to recover the bicycle. Maybe this person isn't the owner of the bike. Maybe they work for the Park Service and this bike was abandoned and they were asked to, bring the bike back to the park office. We don't know, but we made some judgments merely by a first glance look at the individual. So I want you to go back through your notes there and compare what your initial reaction was with the photo and make some assessment as to why you leaned one way or the other. And just as in this scenario, we made judgment calls based on appearances, we do these things in many, many aspects of our lives. And we just need to be aware of this fact. Not only do we judge others, but others are judging us. And this is both for criminal behavior that we're talking about right now, but other behaviors as well, both in a professional environment, in our social interactions, even within our families. So, something to think about. And now we're going to look at some statistics from crime and incarceration that also may be wound back to implicit biases. Sort of just absorb this information. So, what could be causing these differences? And could it be implicit bias that is doing this? So, the impact of implicit bias can also come into play on sentencing and convictions. So, think about this one. If a black individual and a white individual are accused of the very same crime, do they have an equal chance of being convicted? The reality shows that if there is at least one black member in the jury pool, that the conviction rates are almost identical for blacks and whites. But compare that to a jury pool of all white individuals with a black defendant, and there was a significantly higher likelihood that the black individual would get a conviction. And it's just something for you to think on and think about bias, both implicit and explicit, with these realities. If a girl, female, or a boy are convicted of the same crime, do you think they should get the same jail sentence? Well, you think whatever you do think. But what's the reality? The reality shows that men, boys, males, receive longer sentences, significantly longer, up to 63% longer sentences on average than do women. And women are twice as likely to avoid incarceration. If a 60-year-old and a 22-year-old are convicted of the same crime, does the 60-year-old deserve to receive a shorter sentence. Whatever you think is valid, but what's reality? Reality shows that young persons, 20 to 21 through 25, typically receive the harshest sentences, followed by the age group next in the series, 26 to 29. Offenders age 50 and above typically receive the most lenient sentences. So there is implicit bias by age. You might think this is just or unjust, but these are just what the numbers show. So how do we combat these implicit biases? The best way, in my opinion, is just to be aware of them, to know and understand that they're in all of us, whether we think we are pure as the wind-driven snow or not. You do have biases. It's in our nature. It's in the human nature, and it's a survival mechanism. We build up a template based on our life experiences, things that we have observed and seen along the way, and we have our own little computer program as to how to deal with the next case that comes along. But sometimes those maps, those images are not 100% correct. And we can do ourselves a favor and society a favor if we work to, increase our map, to learn more, to study more, and to understand more. And this is the final thought on implicit bias, is just to be aware of yourself and others. So you want to be able to portray yourself in the best possible light, because others are building up their mental map of you. Thanks for listening.